Usually when we think about a country collapsing, we picture like a sudden dramatic explosion, right?
Right, yeah. Very cinematic, localized events.
Exactly. I mean, you picture a war, a revolution, something highly visible that you can just watch unfold on the evening news with smoke and fire everywhere.
Yeah, the typical Hollywood dystopia.
Right. But what if the collapse of a nation is actually a lot more like a house infested with termites?
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Right. Because from the street, the outside looks perfectly fine. The paint is fresh. The roof is intact. But behind the drywall, the load-bearing pillars are just entirely hollowed out.
Yeah, completely compromised.
And you don't actually realize the structure is failing until you lean against the wall and the entire thing just crumbles right around you.
Right.
So today, for you, the learner, we are leaning against the wall of a really highly provocative alternate history scenario found in our sources today. It's titled, "What if Climate Collapse Brought Down Australian Governments?"
And, it's important to clarify up front, this isn't some pitch for a sci-fi movie.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
It is a rigorous risk analysis. It's drawing on constitutional law, climate science, and reports from the Australian Security Leaders Climate Group, or ASLCG.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is that modern democracies, they implicitly rely on a foundation of baseline guarantees.
Right.
Like we assume the water will just flow from the tap, the grocery store shelves will always be stocked, and the state can provide basic physical safety.
Just the bare minimums of a functioning society.
Exactly. But when those baseline guarantees fail, the legal and constitutional frameworks that were originally designed to hold a country together can't, and this is the wild part, they can paradoxically become the exact mechanisms that accelerate its tearing apart.
Wow. Yeah, it's heavy stuff. And we are going to examine these structural vulnerabilities highlighted in this modeling completely impartially.
Right, just looking at the mechanics.
Exactly. We're unpacking the deep mechanics of systemic risk without taking any political sides here. We're just looking at what the source material presents.
Yeah, because climate change isn't just an environmental issue, It really is a supreme test of constitutional design.
It really is. And to understand how a massive decentralized system physically breaks, we first have to look at how it goes blind.
Yes, the epistemic decay.
Right. The very first domino to fall in this whole collapse scenario is the degradation of strategic foresight. Basically, the state's capacity to even forecast what is coming is just dismantled.
Right, and that concept of epistemic decay, it's crucial. I mean, to manage any crisis, a government needs raw, unvarnished data.
Yeah.
But what we see modeled here is this deliberate administrative withdrawal from risk modeling infrastructure.
Like getting rid of the people who actually run the numbers.
Precisely. Specifically, the sources note the elimination of 92 core climate science and modeling positions at the CSIRO.
Which is the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organization, right? Australia's premier national science agency.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this. It's like driving down a really treacherous, winding mountain road in the dead of night, and instead of turning on the headlights, the driver actively rips the dashboard out of the car.
That is exactly it. And if we carry that analogy further, ripping out the dashboard doesn't just mean you can't see the road ahead. I mean, it means you don't even know that your engine is actively overheating or, that your brake lines are leaking.
Right, you're just totally oblivious.
Yeah. Because those 92 scientists, they were the exact people tasked with modeling localized weather extremes, shifting bushfire dynamics, and flood risks.
And this reduction in scientific capacity, it happens exactly when the National Climate Risk Assessment highlighted, 63 nationally significant climate risks facing the country.
Right, 63. So at the exact moment the state needs maximum visibility to design its infrastructure, its vision is severely impaired.
And I mean, to make it even worse, even when the government does look ahead, they hide the map from everyone else.
Oh, the O&I report?
Yeah. The federal government commissioned the Office of National Intelligence to do this comprehensive climate security risk assessment, but then they immediately classified the findings.
Which completely prevents any public, academic, or even legislative scrutiny.
You can't prepare for what you aren't allowed to know.
Exactly. Without transparency, you just cannot build a whole-of-nation response framework because the nation isn't allowed to know the full extent of the vulnerabilities.
So naturally, you have to ask why. Why would a state structurally blind itself like that?
Well, the analysis points to a really profound policy contradiction, which they call the transition paradox.
Right, where the international promises completely collide with domestic economic reality.
Yes.
Because internationally, Australia signed the Bellum Declaration, committing to a just, orderly, and equitable transition away from fossil fuels. But domestically, state governments are doing the exact opposite.
Yeah, the disconnect is massive.
I mean, look at Western Australia, for example. They are fast-tracking massive projects like the $14 billion Burrup Hub. They even explicitly stripped their own state environmental protection authority of the power to regulate greenhouse gas emissions.
Right. And that paradox right there answers the why.
How so?
Well, this blindness, it isn't accidental, right? It is a byproduct of a political and economic system that is structurally dependent on the exact economic activities driving its own physical undoing.
Wow. So admitting the problem means destroying their current business model.
Right. Acknowledging the full scope of the climate risk would require dismantling the current economic engine. So the system protects itself in the short term by just refusing to look at the long-term data.
But, refusing to look at the dashboard doesn't stop the engine from catching fire.
No, it definitely doesn't.
Because the government can't see the risk. The agricultural sector and all these critical supply chains are left totally exposed to a permanent shift in the baseline climate.
And we have to remember, Australia's geography is incredibly vast.
Right, huge distances.
Yeah, which means its supply chains are exceptionally long and highly fragile. I mean, they essentially operate as a single point of failure system.
Just one weak link and the whole thing snaps.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When you look at the compounding floods of 2022, you see this vulnerability perfectly illustrated.
Oh, right, with the highway.
Yeah. There are only a few critical road and rail corridors linking the primary agricultural regions to the cities. So when the Stuart Highway flooded, these massive road trains carrying basic food supplies to the Northern Territory were completely stranded.
I remember reading that they were forced to take like a 3,000-kilometer detour just to deliver basic groceries.
Yeah, 3,000 kilometers just to get food on the shelves.
No, wait a minute. I do have to push back a little on the severity of this.
Okay, sure.
Because Australia is famously the land of droughts and flooding rains, right?
Yeah.
Haven't they always dealt with extreme weather? Why would this specific time break the system when all the historical droughts haven't?
That's a fair question. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, we see that these are not isolated cyclical droughts that eventually break and, return to a historical mean.
Okay, so what is it then?
We are looking at a permanent crisis cascade. Take the Murray-Darling Basin, for instance, which produces 40% of the nation's agricultural value.
40%? That is massive.
It is, and the data projects that by mid-century, temperatures there could rise up to 1.8 degrees Celsius above 1990 levels.
Which doesn't sound like a lot to the average person, maybe, but it's huge.
Right, it doesn't just mean a hotter summer. It fundamentally alters the hydrology of the soil itself.
How so? Like, what is the actual mechanism there?
It's called evapotranspiration. As the ambient temperature rises, the rate at which moisture evaporates from the soil and transpires from the plants, it increases exponentially.
So the ground just dries out faster.
Way faster. The soil bakes into this hard, dry sponge, so when it finally does rain, that desiccated soil absorbs everything immediately, meaning the runoff never actually reaches the river systems.
Oh, wow. So the rivers just don't refill.
Exactly. And the historical water allocations, the legal rights that farmers have to draw water, they were based on 20th century rainfall averages that simply no longer exist.
Right. They're banking on a climate from 50 years ago.
Yeah. And the projections suggest that by 2050, the value of irrigated agricultural output in the basin will halve.
Done half.
Yes. That is a $7.2 billion loss, and it's driven entirely by sheer biophysical reality.
Okay, but even if domestic agriculture takes a massive hit, couldn't a wealthy nation just leverage the global market? You just import your way out of the food deficit, right?
You could, absolutely, if the rest of the world wasn't experiencing the exact same planetary scale disruption.
All right.
Yeah, the global trade assumptions completely fail in this scenario. For example, China's cereal production is projected to fall by 18% by the 2040s due to their own severe water scarcity.
So Australia's trading partners are struggling to feed themselves too.
Exactly. The historical stability of Australia's primary trading relationships just evaporates. So you have chronic domestic water shortages meeting global supply chain dislocations, all happening simultaneously.
Like a terrifying combination.
It is. And when those two forces collide, the temporary localized grocery store shortages we saw during the 2022 floods, they transform into a permanent state of urban resource scarcity.
Okay, so the food is running critically low, the rivers are literally drying up, and the central government is paralyzed.
Yes.
This is the moment the scenario shifts from an environmental disaster into a full-blown constitutional crisis.
Right.
Because when the resources run dry, state governments stop looking out for the nation and start looking out for themselves.
Yeah, they really do. And the Australian Constitution, specifically Section 92, was designed to ensure that trade, commerce, and intercourse among the states remain absolutely free.
That was the whole point of federalism.
Exactly. It was the ultimate legal glue meant to bind the distinct colonies into a single functioning nation.
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. Because this constitution was built to glue the states together, but in a crisis, the states use that exact same glue to build walls.
Yeah, and they do it using a very specific legal mechanism. The precedent was actually set during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Oh, I remember how strict those Australian lockdowns were. Wait, are you saying state premiers would use that exact same public health loophole to keep out their own citizens?
Yes, that is exactly what the modeling suggests.
Wow.
During the pandemic, state premiers used the Biosecurity Act and emergency public health powers to slam their borders shut, which legally bypassed Section 92.
So it's already been tested in court.
Right. In the climate collapse scenario, state governments weaponize this exact precedent, as northern parts of the country become literally uninhabitable due to extreme wet bulb temperatures.
Because at a certain wet bulb temperature, the human body just can't sweat to cool down anymore.
Exactly, it becomes lethal. So millions of people attempt internal migration. And in response, southern states declare localized emergencies.
To stop the migration.
Yeah. They frame the influx of climate refugees as a direct threat to municipal sanitation, water reserves, and public health. So they use those biosecurity powers to legally close their borders, hoarding energy and food, and completely fragmenting the Federation.
And nowhere is this fragmentation more explosive than in Western Australia.
Oh, absolutely. WA is a unique case.
Right. I mean, to understand why, you really have to look at Western Australia's historic regionalism. WA has always been considered like an outlier state.
Very much so.
It's geographically isolated from the populated East Coast by a massive desert, and it has this long history of feeling economically exploited by the federal government in Canberra.
Yeah.
In fact, I found this crazy. In a 1933 referendum, Western Australians voted to secede from the Federation by a massive 75% majority.
Right, and that historical context is crucial. That 75% isn't just a fun piece of trivia for a pub quiz. It represents a deeply ingrained cultural sentiment.
In their political DNA.
Exactly. So you take that historical resentment, you add a massive compounding resource crisis, and WA perceives complete resource autarky.
They just go it alone.
Yeah. Relying entirely on its mineral independence, it flat out ignores federal emissions mandates. It fast-tracks those massive fossil fuel projects like the Burrup Hub we talked about earlier.
Claiming they need the money, right?
Right. They claim they absolutely need the revenue to fund energy-intensive desalination plants just to keep their coastal cities alive.
And when the federal government tries to intervene, to enforce national policy, WA just withholds its mineral royalties.
Which achieves de facto economic independence.
And leaves the federal government financially crippled in the process.
Yeah. Analysts refer to this psychological and political shift as water nationalism.
Water nationalism.
Yeah. It's not just some bureaucratic dispute over state rights. It's a fundamental shift where a citizen's political identity becomes built entirely around local resource survival rather than any vague sense of national unity.
I mean, it makes sense. If the federal government can't guarantee your water, your loyalty defaults to the state premier who says they can.
Exactly. It's basic survival at that point.
So the West essentially goes rogue and economically insulates itself. But on the East Coast, the dynamic is entirely different.
Very different.
Because the population is much denser, and the crucial resources are shared across highly contested borders. So here, the crisis turns from economic withholding into actual physical conflict.
Right. The eastern states essentially fracture along hydrological lines.
Following the rivers.
Yeah. The Murray-Darling Basin spans multiple eastern states. So as the evapotranspiration bakes the soil and those rivers slow to a trickle, you suddenly have upstream states and downstream states fighting over a shrinking pool of water.
Which gets intense.
Very. The modeling details how armed farming groups and private corporate security firms begin physically blocking water transfers.
So you actually have border skirmishes between state jurisdictions over river access.
Yes.
It's almost feudal, like warlords fighting over a well.
It really is a breakdown of civil order. And while that conflict is paralyzing the agricultural heartland, the internal climate migration from the north is just accelerating.
Because people are desperately moving south to find cooler temperatures.
Right, and everyone has their eyes fixed on Tasmania.
Ah, Tasmania. Because it's viewed in climate modeling as the ultimate climate lifeboat, right?
Exactly. It is the southernmost state, it's an island, and it is historically much cooler.
Yeah.
The ecological models even show that gray-headed flying foxes, fruit bats, will actually attempt to migrate across the ocean to Tasmania.
Wait, bats migrating across the ocean?
Yeah, to escape mainland heat waves that literally cause them to drop dead out of the trees.
Oh, wow. That is bleak.
It is.
But I want you, the listener, to just imagine trying to figure out where to move your family to be safe. You do the research, you pack up your life, you manage to cross the Bass Strait to Tasmania, only to realize that the safe zone is collapsing precisely because millions of other people had the exact same idea.
Yeah.
Like, how does a local government even manage that kind of unprecedented demographic shock?
Well, the harsh reality is it can't. And this reveals the tragedy of what analysts call the lifeboat myth.
Because a lifeboat can only hold so many people.
Exactly. A safe haven only remains safe if it possesses the carrying capacity for the influx. The massive wave of mainland migrants completely overwhelms Tasmania's municipal infrastructure.
Like the water and hospitals.
Right. The local water treatment plants, the health systems, the emergency services, they just aren't scaled for a sudden population explosion of that magnitude.
And on top of the population crush, the climate data shows Tasmania itself is taking a massive hit, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Because the National Climate Risk Assessment projects a 10-fold increase in extreme heat wave days down there, along with severe flash floods and mudslides as the weather patterns become more volatile.
Yeah, the failure of the Tasmanian lifeboat proves a really terrifying point. In a highly interconnected system experiencing planetary scale disruption, there is no geographic escape.
You cannot simply outrun a collapsing atmosphere.
You really can't.
So the states are waging water wars, they are weaponizing public health laws to close their borders, and the supposed island safe havens are sinking under the sheer weight of climate refugees.
It's chaos.
And the federal government in Canberra is just watching the nation literally disintegrate.
Which is when the executive branch plays its final desperate card.
Right, and it triggers the ultimate collapse of the military and federal power.
Yeah, because under the Australian Constitution, Section 119 dictates that the Commonwealth shall protect every state against invasion and, critically here, against domestic violence.
So, using the National Emergency Declaration Act, or NED, the Prime Minister attempts this massive federal overreach.
Exactly.
To stop the states from hoarding critical resources, the federal government bypasses the state executives entirely. They unilaterally deploy the Australian Defence Force, the ADF, to physically seize control of critical resource nodes.
Right. We're talking about securing the Snowy Hydro scheme, taking over the major dams, and literally seizing Western Australia's gas terminals by force.
But the deployment fails.
It does.
And it fails for a deeply systemic reason, right? The military itself is physically degraded by the very climate crisis it is being deployed to manage.
Yes, the environment itself becomes the primary adversary. The projections for the ADF's northern bases, places like Darwin, Catherine, and Bradshaw, show them exceeding 35 degrees Celsius for most of the year.
Wait, for most of the year?
Most of the year.
So what does this all mean for a military force?
Well, it means operations just grind to a halt. At those sustained extreme temperatures, the human body simply cannot cool itself. You cannot safely conduct high-intensity military training. Runways begin to buckle under the heat. Helicopter rotors actually lose lift in the thinned, superheated air.
Oh, wow. The air is too thin to even fly properly.
Yeah. The operational capacity of the armed forces is physically crippled by the thermodynamics of the environment.
And even beyond the heat, the military is just completely exhausted.
Well, complete.
Because for decades leading up to this point, they have been utilized as a domestic disaster recovery force, right? Because the civilian emergency services were overwhelmed long ago.
Yeah, the military has spent years evacuating fire zones, suppressing domestic unrest, moving food logistics, and really just acting as a stopgap for failing civil infrastructure.
Doing the jobs that local governments used to do.
Exactly. And this raises an important question about what analysts call the militarization of climate governance.
It means what exactly?
Well, when a democracy becomes reliant on its military to perform basic civil functions like distributing groceries, managing water allocations, and fighting bushfires, it fundamentally erodes military readiness.
Because they aren't training for their actual jobs.
Right. Maintenance schedules for vehicles are completely blown. Training cycles for actual combat are skipped entirely. And morale just plummets when soldiers are essentially used as, armed grocery clerks.
Yeah, a military trained for national defense is suddenly policing its own citizens over water rations.
Exactly. It is a direct pathway to state failure.
It's like a brain desperately telling an arm to lift a heavy weight to save its life, but the muscles in the arm are already completely torn.
That's a perfect analogy.
The central government issues the order to secure the country, but the physical capacity to execute that order simply no longer exists.
Yeah, the cascading failures we've discussed today.
Yeah.
The willful blindness to the data, the agricultural collapse from evapotranspiration, the legal loopholes used to balkanize the states, and the physical degradation of the military, they all converge.
They all hit at once.
Right. This scenario is just a masterclass in systemic risk. It demonstrates vividly how constitutional law, logistical supply chains, and environmental thermodynamics are not separate silos.
They are totally intertwined.
Yes. A failure in rainfall isn't just a problem for farmers. It directly creates a problem for constitutional lawyers, military planners, and grocery store logistics managers.
It all comes back to that house with the termites.
Yeah.
You turn a blind eye to the structural damage. The load-bearing pillars of agriculture and supply chains hollow out, the states turn on each other using the very Constitution meant to bind them, and the military simply lacks the physical capacity to hold up the collapsing roof.
Right.
The structure holds up right until the moment you lean against it, and then it doesn't.
Which really highlights why understanding the whole board is absolutely vital when assessing risk in the 21st century.
It really is. So, to wrap up our deep dive today, we want to leave you, the listener, with a final lingering question to ponder long after we sign off.
And it's a big one.
It is. If the very structure of federalism, a decentralized system specifically designed to protect regional interests and maintain a delicate balance of power, if that is the exact mechanism that accelerates state failure during a planetary crisis, can any highly decentralized democracy actually survive the climate century without fundamentally rewriting its constitution?
A lot to think about there.
Definitely. Keep questioning the systems around you, look past the fresh paint on the walls, and we will see you next time.